Hello, good morning, and welcome to your program, Early Exchange. It's a beautiful, beautiful Wednesday on the side. This happens to be Lagos, Africa's most beautiful city. And this is Souk News, where we are all about positive programming. My name is Chuks John-Rogers. Chuks, so hey, don't be shocked that you're seeing my face on Early Exchange. You're welcome. Now, today we will be talking about climate change, but not in the side you know or what you're thinking about. You're looking at the finance part of it. And that's what we're heading to today. We are going to somewhere that some good, beautiful news is coming out from. For those that know, COP is coming very soon. We ask questions. What happened to the last one? 29. Who is going? Who is not going? 28. What happened? But now we're looking at financing. And ADB, Asian Development Bank, they've done something that is new, something that is worth emulating. Something that it's going to spark a whole lot of fire, and people will catch up with time. And we are talking about the Asian Development Bank, and they've made a significant stride in promoting sustainable finance. And as we speak right now, they are investing a little over 15 million in sustainable bonds, and this is going to be issued in a very beautiful country called Georgia. Unless you heard us right. And this is like the very first time. We'll get to talk about this particular event and talk about this side of it. Then we'll also see how is it going to trickle down to Europe. Mind you, is Asia. Then how is Asia also going to take it? To what extent is this funding, these bonds going to profit those that will be buying, those that will be investing? And what exactly is going to come out from this trend? People are always looking for how do we finance what's happening in the sustainability space sector. Now, for those that might not understand, whether we like it or not, we must take action. Now, whether we also like it or not, there is a problem. And when there is a problem, which means there is going to be a solution. And with solution comes industries. People pay for it, be it energy, be it desertification, be it agriculture, be it the oil and gas, whatever form that we are going to find solutions as it concerns sustainability and the environment, an industry is being born. So some other people will have to change, some other people will have to grow, some other people will have to move. An industry will grow. People that are ready will take advantage and make profit. It's a race. It's always a race. But for today, we're going to deal on the financing coming from ADB, Asian Development Bank, and we have an expert to shed more light on this particular topic, on this particular side of financing that is taking a new turn. Your Excellencies, please join me as I welcome Brian Owino. He is a climate finance expert, and he'll be joining us on Early Exchange this morning. Brian, good morning. How are you doing?
Me here for
Are
this
you there?
particular discussion. Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Good morning to you. Thank you for inviting me to this discussion. It's very timely, especially now that we are approaching COP29 and are trying to address issues around climate finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I always love it when I see my brothers talking about either of the COP from 28 to 29. It's not long ago when we came back from 28, Dubai. And now we're talking about 29. Before we talk about this money and the bond and what it's going to bring to the table and the possibilities, can we talk about the finances that came out of 28? Did Africa really get a bit of it? Those contracts that were signed, those MOUs that were signed, did Africa contribute much and get something out of it?
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, in the last COP, what we saw is that there was a lot of conversation revolving around loss and damage fund, but then there's still a lot of discussions on how we can pull private sector financing and other forms of finances that are needed to facilitate and drive climate resilience, especially amongst vulnerable communities and in emerging markets such as sub-Saharan Africa. And we hope that probably from the discussions that will approach in COP29 will even strengthen this further, so that we see more financing just beyond the 100 billion that is committed from the developed nations, we hope to see that there are more legal frameworks that can come from the national, governments in order to allow private capital to flow in financing climate resilience as well as mitigation side.
I like it when you mention figures. Now let's go back to that same figure you mentioned, 100 billion. Has it been paid out? Has any country come out to say, okay, good, we've gotten a percentage, 10%, 100%, whatever? Has we seen that money being paid out? Let's not saying though, but have we seen that money being paid out? I like the smile on your face.
Well, this smile is not any good news, but this means that there's a lot going on during negotiations. The commitment of 100 billion US dollars annually is far from reach, and even as we advance further, as we go towards 2030, the cost of adaptation, for instance, the cost of building resilience amongst vulnerable communities is becoming more expensive. So the longer we wait, the cost of making the small-scale farmers, the cost of making our infrastructure more resilient is becoming more expensive. So, as we see, how the finance is flowing, and this data you can find it from the Climate Policy Initiative, an institution that has been tracking how climate finance flows. Much of this data is either coming in as debt, debt financing, especially for developing countries, which still the mark of 100 billion USD per year is far from reach, and there's still a push to make sure that this is within reach. But just one comment on that: in as much as we look at the $100 billion from US $1 billion from the developed countries, there's the need also to highlight the essence and the role that private sector can play, and this is where the capital markets such as green bonds come in to fit into the segments and the areas where we need much finance, especially in the form of the different forms such as grants, such as loans, and what can drive the capital markets to invest more in more sustainable development, infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, the funny side of it is conversation leads to conversation. I really have a whole lot of things I want to talk about on this particular bond, but hey, as it is right now, I still want to ask you this. Do you think this 100 billion or any other one that will be added to it should be based on debt financing? If you are the one negotiating for Africa, or let's say negotiating for your home country, will you base that money on debt financing?
Well, I think just to highlight a bit, there's the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities, which came way before the Paris Agreement, and this was highlighting the differences that exist on how emissions, how the history of emissions within the climate space. So, coming from from a continent where we emit less than 4% or less than 3%, and there's much of impact in terms of climate climate impacts around critical sectors like food security. I think coming from the expert view, there's really need to to advance and to whoever was responsible for this to take it. But then that doesn't mean we can also sit back and not take actions. All hands are needed here on deck to make sure that we address the impacts of climate change, because our people, our farmers are experiencing this. In 2022, for example, in Nigeria, there was a huge flooding in the country, but these are things that we need to address by structuring resilient infrastructure. So going to the tables, whoever is negotiating and whoever is speaking about this type of financing should really go there and we structure different forms of financial instruments, because already our economies have a lot of burdens in terms of debt. So the more we take more debt, it really results into other unintended impacts, for example, in inflation, and makes the economy even not really get on track in terms of addressing issues like poverty. So I believe that there are other forms that can best serve us, serve the continent. And when we go to negotiations and we go to speak, we really need to be very careful on what types of deals we get into, and how best to address financial needs and financial gaps that exist within the continent as a whole.
Thank you very much, Brian. Now let's go straight to this bond. This is more of a new trend that we're seeing right now. We are used to getting to see, be it other continents, pledge. Because for now, that is majorly what we get to see. They make a pledge and say, okay, good, we will give this. Then there is this taxing that has been there based on your emission. Now, for that particular taxing, there is a body that does the collection. We hope to have a site one day where we can always, at end of every month, get to see what is collected or who emits what. Now we know who emits what, but we still know that the UN and those big committee control, and Africa has no say. Me and you has no say. So now let's get to this particular bond. This is something new. Do you see this trend catching fire? When I mean catch fire, do you see it increasing? $20 million, people will say is not that much, but it's still something. This is new. Asian Development Bank. Georgia, you get, okay, Georgia is part of Europe, it's part of Asia. This is very new. Now they are selling bonds. Someone will get to buy. People will make profit at the end of the day, but it's geared towards effectively financing climate change. It will get to a particular place. We'll get to see, maybe they have not given us those particular details, but do you see this catching fire across beyond Georgia, beyond Asia, getting to other European nations? Let's leave Africa for now. We do the taking. Do you see it catching fire?
Yes. Well, green bonds, all these types of financial instruments have really gained traction, especially in the developed countries. And this is because, if you remember so well, there is the context of ESG funds and there's the context of sustainable development goals. And these are very critical pathways in order to address the inequalities that we see globally. Coming from Asia, coming from Europe, we are going to see these things advancing further. And we already have much of it happening in this continent rather than the African context where it's less than 3%. So there's really need to advance this further, and we will see this growing more and more, especially on the role of private financing or public financing. But we'll also talk about the different sources of financing that can come in within the capital markets to support these sustainability bonds.
Emits the list. If we put every continent and look at their emission rate, we emit the least. But unfortunately, it looks like we are suffering the most, thanks to those that have industrialized way far before us. Now, if we look at this investment, if we look at this financing, how can we be able to say, okay, let's make it very transparent, whereby we know the projects, the communities that really need this financing, and not just good articulated projects and good memo or paper submitted and these finances are given? How can we be able to separate the chaff?
Thank you. You are getting to the core of it. Thank you very much. I think the most important thing is policy frameworks or legal frameworks that guide how these bonds are issued, as well as how we measure, monitor, and track impacts. So the purpose of a sustainability bond or green bonds is to ensure that sustainable development goals or particular impacts are achieved from these finances. This is why they are issued, and they should be able to reach the intended purpose. And one way to do this is to adopt and ensure that international frameworks or the guidelines that are issued either at national levels are followed and each of the boxes are ticked. So there's a criteria to avoid issues like greenwashing, for instance. That is a critical thing that should be considered at the company portfolio. Then secondly is sustainability reports or reporting so that this is made transparent. For example, in EU, we see this mandatory requirement to report on performance of these, these funds or this, this type of financial instruments. So this should be strengthened, made public, and the investors themselves should be able to see, so that whenever there's an investment channeled, it goes to the right projects, and this should be measurable, which is a keyword. It should be measurable. The impact can be verifiable to avoid most of the issues we see around these bonds such as greenwashing.
At government, this is coming from yes, Asian Development Bank, but the bank itself in Georgia, basics, it's a private institution, it's a commercial bank. Now let's now look at this government commercial bank and private initiative. How can other governments, even the one that where it's coming from right now, create environments to make this not just a one-off, but something that can grow beyond what it is right now? African governments too, if possible.
Yes, thank you. This is very possible because in the form of these international frameworks, much of this under the Paris Agreement need to be adopted, nationally. And this is because each of the countries that are signatories to the UN need to pursue the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So by having a more robust, a more clear legal structures, for example, incentives and creating policies that drive and allow the capital markets to work appropriately. And this is the first step. The first step is to ensure that there's an enabling environment where private capital and as well as the different financial sector players can actively participate in raising funds for sustainable development, the social projects, as well as the green projects. That is things like green energy, for example, just to strengthen the grid and ensure that there's stable electricity supply to the people, to the schools, for children going to school, and so forth. These are the roles of these types of bonds. So what governments needs to do is to look at the policy landscape and ensure that the policy is streamlined and in line and requires a very strong and measurable frameworks. And there's a lot of international policies out there, but those should not be taken as they are. They should be adapted to each of the individual countries based on the needs and based on the circumstances.
Thank you. Now, if I want to buy shares of any quoted company, the information is out there. Before I even get there, is in my face. The same thing if it happens to be bonds, government bonds, or if I need to trade. Now, this is something new to a lot of people. How can banks and other organizations create enough information or educate the people on sustainable bonds and how profitable it is so that people can really get into it?
Thank you. Most of the time, people are attracted to performance of a portfolio, especially where there's profitability. But unfortunately, to some extent, the profitability of sustainable bonds takes time. It doesn't mean that they are less compared to the other types of bonds that we see in the market. It's just because these are long-term goals that they tend to have more social benefits. And the role of commercial banks, for instance, especially for individual investors as well as private companies, is to make information available, because information is what is actually lacking. People do not know about these types of bonds, and they already exist. For example, Nigeria already issued the first green bond in 2017. Now we're in 2024. It's been 5 years now. It therefore needs to be this information needs to be shared publicly, and also provide some of the knowledge or knowledge sharing sessions with investors, private investors, so that they know the actual benefits, the actual social benefits, to put it right, and how this can actually impact the society. These are really critical ways. And also when it comes to the side of reporting, especially on the impact, this needs to be very structured and very transparent so that we avoid some cases where we have some sort of greenwashing or lack of information or lack of transparency. So transparency framework, for example, the International Carbon Markets Authority issues a guidelines on this that can be adapted to each of the country's circumstances.
Okay, now thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's also look at this particular scenario. If we have hedge fund managers, a lot of them with big names, when they talk to you about a particular investment, you take them serious. Then for the major investment companies, be it in Africa or outside Africa, once you hear their name, you want to read about what they have to offer. Is it possible, or do you see that likelihood of partnering with these major hedge fund managers or investment houses to also invest and market sustainable bonds?
Yes, I do agree that partnership is very key, especially in introducing new concepts or new products like this one. Some of these products, looking at their performance, how they've done in the other markets, is really a good case study to see on the types of impacts that they can have. The hedge funds, the fund managers or the investors from different parts of the world can actually take part and give very strong guidance. But I really also see a strong advocacy to liaise this with local institutions. And the reason as to why I advocate for local institutions and local banks is because they understand the local landscape better. They're within the regulatory framework, within the national the national context. So when they provide these types of partnerships, working very closely with our national institutions, then these types of funds or these types of learnings can really go a long way to advise our investors, even individual investors, whoever wants to pick particular funds in a given portfolio, just to advance and to understand what they are investing in. That is the most critical point, understanding what somebody is investing in as an investor, what impact it will create in as much as these concepts are new and some of these funds are new. Sustainability is really key, and all financial institutions, all types of capital required to advance this is highly needed. And we see a lot of capital reallocation, especially after the experiences we had with COVID in the external markets. Hedge funds, the big names like, the big names in the US are really doing this work. For example, what we saw with BlackRock in the United States. Thank you.
To be really sure that, okay, if I'm putting my money down for 5, 15, 20 years, I should have that guarantee that at the end of the day, I won't just be making profit, but I won't lose my money. Where is that confidence going to come from?
Thank you. I will just mention two things on that. The one thing is risks, because as investors really look at the portfolio and conduct due diligence so that the risk that's associated with these types of bonds or investments are very clear to them. So making sure that the risks are very clear, what you're investing in, is one key issue that needs to be addressed. And secondly, very extensive due diligence to make sure that actually the bond that you're investing in or the money you're putting in is going to the actual, social sustainability, environmental good is well generated from that. And then secondly is giving clarity on performance data, because sometimes we look at the trends of how these bonds have been performing. And this is key to looking at, the past experiences, the past performance, so that just to get, because data never lies. It's very difficult to get, especially in the capital markets. If they're open, you see it in a 5-year trend, it's very easy to note where the differences are. So that is one way to look at it. Also looking at the public reports and also benchmarking and speaking to those who have been in this sector for some time is really one way to ensure that the money generates the good that it has. But as far as my experience is, sustainability bonds are really a great pillar, especially when where we need financing for social infrastructure, as well as the green aspect, just to mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Don't look like anything, but right across your village or your community, you're seeing desertification. Or rain has not come down in 3 weeks in a rainy season, but you're seeing the impact. Now let's bring this home. How can this sustainability directly affect locals, be it in Africa be it in any other part, directly, what impact is this going to have on that farmer you talked about earlier, or the herder that is running away from the northern part of Africa and has to migrate down to the southern side where there is rain or green for the cattle? How can this directly impact them?
Thank you very much. So in terms of how this can directly impact our communities, especially in the vulnerable context, from the way sustainability bonds are designed, just with the word sustainability, it means that they're strongly linked to sustainable development goals, the SDGs. And this is what is needed when it comes to addressing the finance gaps, especially in developing social infrastructure. That means roads, because when we pool resources or private capital, or through the commercial banks, and these are used either to develop the roads, then better roads means the goods from the farmers can easily, reach markets. Sometimes farmers struggle with access to roads because they don't even have the capacity to do this themselves. It's the role of the government, and the government is struggling with that. So if we have this sustainability bonds, the government is able to pool much resources to structure the social infrastructure. Social infrastructure includes these roads, includes getting schools, building schools, educational facilities, health facilities, and these, in most instances, can be developed in partnership with private sector, the PPP arrangement, which is really critical for our economies. And the good thing with social bonds, also the sustainability bonds, it's that the diversity in which these resources are collected, they come from both domestic markets as well as international markets. So this diversity enables, a huge, pooling resources from different streams. And ultimately, the most important thing, for example, when this is invested in rural electrification, for example, this enables, electricity reaching those that are outside the grid. And you understand this, for example, in the context of Nigeria, electricity access is the stability of the grid is something that I really don't want to get into in this discussion, but just to highlight how important stability of the grid can be when these types of bonds are out there and the government is able to raise this money to build this infrastructure to make the lives of people in rural communities and people in the peri-urban even much better.
Thank you very much. It's been good and wonderful having you, Brian Owino. We will always talk about sustainable development, and we will always talk about the effects the climate change is having. For those that are wondering, yes, if you are in Nigeria, if you are in the southern part, Lagos to be precise, 3 weeks there was no rain in the middle of rainy season. That's climate change, and it's let that hit you for once. Thank you very much for being part of Early Exchange today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Early Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.